Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Hicks, and I'm the Communication Director for the the Greater Spokane region for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I am so excited tonight to be speaking with Matt Latimer, who's the Assistant Director of Communication for North America West area for the church, and Elder Hal C. Hunsaker, Area Authority 70. We're going to be talking tonight about the U.S. Constitution in recognition of Constitution Day, which is on September 17th. So, Matt, can you tell us a little bit about U.S. Constitution Day and what it means?
Sure, Jennifer. Thanks for having us. U.S. Constitution Day was established in 2004 by an act of Congress, and the purpose was to establish a day of the year that we can learn more about our Constitution, the history of it, the principles underlying it. It was very much a focus of Congress when they enacted this statute that they fund educational initiatives about the Constitution so that as citizens and particularly students could learn more about the foundations of our country. So September 17th is significant because that's the day that the delegates to the Constitutional Convention signed the written Constitution. So September 17th, 1787. And after signing the original written Constitution, it was then circulated among the 13 states or colonies at the time to ratify. So it wasn't actually ratified until 1788, but September 17th is kind of the date where all of the delegates or most of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention signed the Constitution. It was sent out to the states for ratification. So September 17th is kind of a significant anniversary date, and every year on this date, then the government has designated this Constitution Day, and a lot of schools have programs about the U.S. Constitution. There's lots of learning materials that are available from the government to help define that curriculum. And then even other institutions like churches and civic organizations often have activities that commemorate this day.
Did you learn about the Constitution in school, the U.S. Constitution Day in school yourself?
I don't remember if I
don't
did
either, but
about the specific day, but certainly I remember growing up in Seattle having social studies and other classes about the U.S. Constitution. I'm sure there was probably something surrounding that. Of course, that was prior to the day being established. I'm a lawyer by training, so most of my learning about the Constitution probably came later in life in terms of specifics. But all of us, I think, probably had times in our school years where we learned about the basic underlying principles.
well, it's really interesting to think about this document coming together in a time before all the conveniences we have today, like the internet and I mean, even phones, right? How did they do this? How it's just amazing to think about.
Well,
How,
and I would say how they did it is that a bunch of very smart people and very young people, by and large. I mean, other than um, Benjamin Franklin, everybody was kind of in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, which is quite extraordinary. And no, this had never been done before. There was never, prior to the U.S. Constitution being drafted and ratified, there's never been another country in the world that ever had a written constitution. There have been political philosophers that had described the idea of a written constitution, but the idea that you could actually put one together and put one together in a relatively quick period of a few months in a small area, backwards area of the world is really quite extraordinary. And a lot of the founders have acknowledged that they felt the hand of Providence in their discussions.
oh, I'm sure they did. Wow, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that. Well, Elder Hunsaker, let's turn to you. What does the U.S. Constitution mean to our country? And really, why does it matter? Why should
Sure.
we care?
Well, it provides this really remarkable foundational ability for us to have freedoms and opportunities that we probably take for granted in our lives today. It provides the foundation of our government, the different branches and how they interact and the checks and balances. It provides the basis for the rule of law, the protection of our basic rights, so that we can in this discussion, really focusing on religious liberties and the ability to worship how, where, and when we may. That was all brought to pass and made available and possible because of the Constitution of the United States, based upon on the democratic principles that we love, that ensures that the voice of the people is heard, and that it outlines conflict resolution and the ability to deal with struggles and differences, and to think that this was created in the 1780s, and it's still applicable and enforced today is really remarkable. And as Brother Latimer shared, it was the first, and it has been attempted to be replicated many times throughout many countries as they've witnessed the blessings of this document and its power and what it has allowed us to do as a people throughout these last several hundred years. So
very interesting.
If I could add on to that,
Yeah.
Elder Hunsaker, that it's significant. It was the first of its kind. Now every country in the world, other than about 3 of them, have written constitutions. Wow. And most of them are based on the U.S. Constitution, at least the general structure and the notion of rights. So that's really been a gift of this country and the Lord to the world. The fact that it endures, but it's also been copied to good effect in many areas of the world.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, Matt, back to you. How does the U.S. Constitution protect our rights to worship? And what can we do to protect those rights?
Okay, yeah. So there's a couple of things that most people will be familiar with contained in the First Amendment. So actually, it's not in the Constitution itself. It's an amendment to the Constitution. The First Amendment, among other things, prevents or controls how we express ourselves religiously. First part of that amendment deals with what we sometimes call the Establishment Clause. And the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment says that the government can't prefer one religion over another religion. In other words, it can't establish a state religion. And this was significant because up until that time, most countries in Europe had state-sponsored religions. And even some of the states in the original United States had a state-sponsored religion. So the Establishment Clause basically says government cannot put its hands on the scales and prefer one religious group or practice or belief over another. And that controls government from essentially providing one group a benefit the other groups might not otherwise have. The second clause in the religious clauses of the Constitution is the Free Exercise Clause. And that says the government can't unduly restrict people's ability to practice their religion. And that includes not only restrict what you believe, but restrict your ability to gather, your ability to preach, your ability to determine churches to determine their own doctrine or appoint their own leaders. So it really is a negative clause in the sense that it forces government to kind of keep its hands out of restricting people's ability to exercise and their religion and believe what they believe. So these two clauses working together, government can't promote one religion over another. It also can't unduly hinder people's ability to practice or churches' ability to practice and promote their beliefs. Provides this little zone around religious practice and belief in the United States where government is not supposed to intrude. And again, that was unique for the time because many countries in the world at the time really didn't have that protection. There was usually a state-sponsored religion that had much greater preferences over other religions, and certain religious practices were disfavored. From the gospel perspective, it creates an ideal environment for their exercise of moral agency, right? Once you have this environment where you can choose to believe or not to believe, or to seek after God in your own way, or to not seek after God if that's what you choose, you now have this excellent conditions for moral agency. And I think that's one of the things that really created conditions where Joseph went to the grove. There was religions contending with one another because there was nobody stopping them from promoting their views and ideas, and that confusion really led Joseph to the grove to seek greater light and knowledge and ultimately the restoration. So the US Constitution, in my view, creates this environment where we have, within limits, there's always limits on what you can do in the name of religion and not, but within limits, it creates an environment where people are free to choose to believe or not to believe.
Thank you. That was very interesting. Well, let's move now to Elder Hunsaker for our last question. What is the church doing to promote religious freedom, and how can we join in these efforts?
Perfect. The church is actively and heavily involved in promoting religious freedom. One of my favorite quotes from Prophet Joseph, he declared, "I am just as ready to die in defending the rights of a Presbyterian, a Baptist, or a good man of any other denomination, for the same principle which would trample upon the rights of Latter-day Saints would trample upon the rights of the Roman Catholics, or of any other denomination whom may be unpopular and too weak to defend ourselves." So, especially in the last few years, the brethren have given more than a dozen addresses, specifically focusing on the Constitution and religious freedom, and the necessity for us to fight, to be active, and to not just believe that it's all going to be okay, because there are those organizations and individuals who are really striving to limit our freedom and our ability. And so the church has put out many public statements and advocacy. They're working with other interfaith groups all of the time. We're gathering together and working with all denominations to help secure the ability that we have to worship how, where, and when we may, and humanitarian efforts globally, and just being active and involved. And so, I think if someone is wondering what can they do, I mean, the first thing is to just not be apathetic to this process, that all of us, no matter where we live, can get involved. And it can be as something as small as participating in local government meetings and knowing what's happening in your community, just being aware, to more grassroots, being a part of volunteering to be a part of interfaith discussions, and just helping lift and stand up for the rights religiously of all of the organizations in our communities. And the church is advocating heavily. They participate in global forums and share the message of the blessings of freedom and of our Constitution, and that it's worth fighting for and defending. And we know there are several places in Doctrine and Covenants where the Lord says, this, I am pleased with this document, and I helped in its creation. And because of that, without that, we wouldn't be here today, at least not in the way that we are. And so it is worth defending. And we know also through prophecy that it's going to get more challenging, and that these freedoms will be challenged, and it's up to us individually to do our part. So.
Yeah, and just on a final note, thank you for sharing those thoughts. I'm glad that the church is actively involved in this arena. Do you just have some final ideas, either of you, about teaching our children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, about the importance of the Constitution and why it matters?
I'll add a few things to Elder Hunsaker, which I think his advice is excellent. So the first thing I would say is that there's a phrase among scholars that talk about these kinds of things where they call it the Pilgrim's Dilemma, or the Pilgrim's Problem. and basically, if we remember our history, the Pilgrims left Europe primarily to seek religious freedom for themselves, and when they came to the colonies, they immediately set up communities that denied religious freedom to anybody who didn't believe as they believed. And so they would cast people out that didn't adhere to their rules. And it's a phenomenon, I guess, for humans, is for us to kind of not like or not defend people that we disagree with. And that's just part of being human, I think. So one of the things I think can be really helpful in terms of defending is recognize is if the religious freedom is usually mostly threatened for groups that can't defend themselves. Because groups that are powerful politically don't have a problem because they control the political process. But the ones that have the problems are the minority groups. And so one thing we can do as Latter-day Saints is not only look out for the interests of our own beliefs and the church, but we can look out the interests of our friends who maybe don't have the same beliefs as us. So look for people in your community who might believe differently than you, but who nevertheless are trying to live their faith as well as they can, but are hindered in some way from doing that. And we can defend their rights just as easily as we can defend ours. And that dovetails maybe into your question, Jennifer, is like, what should we teach our kids? My experience with our kids and with kids that are younger than our kids now is they are uniquely and personally impacted or personally able to really detect unfairness. And so one of the things that we can stress, I think, with the rising generation is that we want, as best possible within the principles of the Constitution, have a way to ensure greater fairness and equality to everybody in our country, regardless of whether we believe we believe like they do or not. And that we can do, as Elder Nelson or President Nelson has said, is to be a peacemaker. That we don't have to necessarily agree on everything, but we can defend the rights of others and respect their human dignity enough to allow them to pursue their own beliefs and faiths. And I think for young people, that's a very resonant message, right? That we will preach the gospel the best we can, and we'll rely on the Holy Ghost to convert and witness. But if somebody at any individual time might disagree with us on a particular issue, we can still reach out with love and compassion and treat them with dignity and respect. And I think the constitutional principles really require that as a nation. I think if the Constitution is going to stand, we have to learn how to disagree better.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah, agree to disagree is something we can do, right? And do it with kindness. Well, thank you for sharing that. I failed to mention that Matt Latimer is also the area religious freedom specialist for the church. So it's really great to have his expertise with us. But brethren, it's been so great visiting with you today about Constitution Day and about the importance of the U.S. Constitution and what we can do to get involved and do our part to, to understand it and to support its principles in our lives. So appreciate your time, and thank you all to the listeners for listening to our program, and I hope that this will help you on your journey. Goodbye.
Thank you.